Good morning and welcome to the EPC Policy Dialogue, delivering a just transition fit for 55 and the renovation wave, kindly supported by Fondazione Cariplo. My name is Melanie Fessler. I am a policy analyst at the European Policy Center, and I'm happy to moderate today's discussion. Before we start, some practicalities. After the introductory remarks by our four panelists, we are looking forward to engaging in a discussion with you and do that in a Q&A session. For that, I would like to ask you to already start preparing your questions. Write them already in the chat box and remember to keep them short. You can, of course, also raise your hand and ask your questions later in person. To start off, let me say a few words on our topic today. As you know, we have all known for some time now that we have to massively invest in renovating our buildings if we want to reduce their emissions and to achieve the climate objectives of the European Green Deal. Buildings have urgently to become more energy efficient, and we need to use more renewable energy sources for heating, for example. We also know that the related proposals of the Fit for 55 package, notably the recast of the Energy Efficiency Directive or EED, the Renewable Energy Directive, RED, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, EPBD, as well as the proposals to extend the Emission Trading System or ETS to the building sector and the Social Climate Fund are currently under discussion. As we speak, we are in the unfortunate situation that the aggression in Ukraine and the EU's dependency on Russian fossil fuels have led to an extreme hike in energy prices that could even increase further if the fossil fuel imports from Russia would be reduced or even cut. This situation calls for an acceleration of the green transition, not only to become independent from Russian gas and other fuels, but also because these higher energy prices have really drastic impacts, especially on vulnerable citizens who already have problems heating their homes and paying their energy bills and are at risk of energy poverty. This need for speed is also acknowledged in last week's communication from the Commission entitled Repower EU. Amongst other interesting initiatives, the communication refers to allowing national measures such as temporary price limits and also announces the front-loaded rollout of green technologies for buildings, such as solar panels on rooftops or heat pumps to enhance clean energy in buildings. All of this only shows the urgent need for actions to be taken in order to support the uptake of clean energy in housing and an acceleration of the renovation wave, which have to come with support measures for low-income households and the most vulnerable people to avoid that they have to bear too much cost. Thus, today, we would like to explore the immediate implications of the war in Ukraine on the renovation wave and what the EU can do to support the most vulnerable. What are the barriers to implementing a just transition, especially in these tumultuous times? But also in the longer term, how can the design and implementation of the renovation wave and the Fit for 55 package help reduce inequality? Therefore, I'm very happy that we have our speakers joining us today. Very warm welcome, Stefan Moser, Head of Unit at DG Energy from European Commission, Sergio Urbani, Director General at Fondazione Cariplo, Clotilde Clark-Foulquier, Project Manager at Fédération, Européenne d'Associations Nationales Travaillant, avec les Sans-Abri, and Robin van Leijen, EU Public Affairs at Aedes and advisor to the chair of the Energy Working Committee at Housing Europe. Welcome. And on that, I would like to give the floor to Stefan, who will give us an overview on the renovation wave and the energy performance of buildings directive. Stefan, you have the floor. Looking forward.
Thanks a lot, Melanie, and good morning to all of you on the panel, but also all the participants, whom I unfortunately don't see. So that's still the virtual format, but we'll have. I'm very much looking forward to the exchange with you this morning. Indeed, as you said, Melanie, the Green Deal, but in particular also energy efficiency and renewable energy are now even more urgent than ever with the current energy crisis. It's an energy price crisis, but potentially also energy supply crisis. So we have to save energy, at least. We have to err on the safe side. and make sure that we reduce our dependence. But in any case, it's an energy price crisis now basically expected to last for much longer than we would have thought maybe just in the autumn when prices were already high, but people thought this will go away. Prices change, etc. But now, of course, it's structural reasons why prices are expected to remain high. So the economics have changed even more dramatically to justifying a more rapid and, I would say, as quickly as ever possible transition to a renewable energy system, and a system where energy efficiency is really considered as the first measure to be looked at. As you said, Melanie, buildings policy, the renovation wave is a broader strategy for buildings policy, is a policy which puts together energy efficiency and renewable energy. So it is a very important storage aspect. Yeah, so to store renewable energy in the form of heat through heat pumps, as you mentioned, as technologies, but also hot water. So this has a major buffering effect for the cyclical and variable nature of renewable energy. And at the same time, the heat market so far is to a large degree dominated by the use of fossil fuels. So this basically brings together two very important challenges. One, to get away from fossil fuels more broadly for the Green Deal, but also as we rely so much on imports, not to mention from one particular country, but also from other countries. We rely on imports, are therefore always vulnerable to fluctuations and changes from a geopolitical point of view, but also the storage aspect. Storage is a key aspect and a key challenge of the energy transition. The whole hydrogen debate, battery debate is linked to that as well, but we should not forget the heat market, both space heating but also water heating as a major buffer, and then of course heat pumps come in here as basically the, I would say, I would even say primary solution for the future heating of homes, being able to draw on electricity, but relatively flexible when actually to use electricity from renewable sources, and that links of course then also to solar energy on the rooftops or in locally organized structures. Having said that, of course, we need to make sure that the overall resilience of the system is maintained. So I think we should always not try to put all eggs in one basket. I think that's a general principle. Before my current job, I actually worked on energy security in DG Energy. So that's a general principle. We have to diversify it to some degree. We have to have redundancy in energy systems. So we should not just rely on one single technology. There are, of course, also other important sources of renewable energy and heating and cooling of buildings. But I think we know in which direction things have to go, and that we have dramatically to accelerate. The topic of today is, of course, also the just transition. So making sure that we are delivering for everybody, and the dramatic increase in energy prices has amplified this challenge. It was already a very big one before the basically explosion in energy prices, which we have seen. I'm using a dramatic word because it is dramatic. I think there we need to, from a strategic point of view, see how we organize the challenge from the renovation wave, but also from the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, also from the Energy Efficiency Directive. Social aspects, most vulnerable citizens, and the worst performing buildings are at the forefront of efforts. And of course, then also the Climate Social Fund, to be fed from revenues from the ETS, is a source of mitigation to allow for the just transition. But this will be one of the sources. Other sources will have to come from other European funds, from the Recovery Fund, from the multilateral financial framework, from the structural funds, and of course from national state aid. And it's a major responsibility for the member states, as we propose in the future building renovation plans and also under the Energy Efficiency Directive, but the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, to address strategically the vulnerable citizens. So prioritize worst performing buildings, because there we have the biggest co-benefits, the biggest synergies for climate, for energy, but also for the quality of life of citizens, and that benefits the most vulnerable people. The effects, of course, on the most vulnerable people have to be limited to the net benefits which they gain from that, and they are very different from the societal benefits, the public interest, basically. So this justifies a massive investment from public funds of whatever source to make up for the shortfall, but basically is in the public interest that has to be financed from public funds, combined with private money, of course, but it cannot be, and it will be impossible to basically have effects which would lead to rent increases, for instance, or where vulnerable people are owners of houses, that they would have to shoulder the entire investments themselves. So this will have to be, there will have to be very intelligent financing and support schemes, certainly on the financing side, but also on the technical side, technical support, how to do that, to get the information there, even when there's skepticism and uncertainties. Do I really can go into that? Can I really go into that? Can I dare to do it? Am I not overexposing myself? And of course, when you have already problems in your life in terms of making end meet, you may not be able to dedicate a lot of thoughts to something else, which is the housing renovation, for instance. So this needs to be very carefully accompanied. And I think this is probably the most important topic of all. If we want to make the climate and energy transition successful, which is now more urgent than ever, towards more energy efficiency and renewable energy, we have to take, in particular, the vulnerable citizens along, not just in terms of cajoling them or pushing them and threatening them with sanctions, but in a positive agenda. So to explain in local environments, through local politicians, local civil servants, and of course local other actors, from banks, from the urban development, what to do to create a positive energy, really, and a positive agenda, so that those people would also really wish to go along and wish to contribute and actively bring in their points of view, so that this can be a success as a kind of society challenge, really. So that's what basically I would like to say up front. Of course, there are many elements in the EPBD, for instance, which can be discussed later on. Improvement of quality of information, of integration of the energy system with the transport system, the different mechanisms to increase the share of renewable energy, and of course also when it comes to the Repower EU plan, etc. But I think that's maybe just as introductory remarks, and I very much look forward to the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this introduction, and especially for stressing that we have to bring together, now that we are facing an amplified challenge, as you have said, not only energy efficiency and renewables, also the technologies and everything, but also we have to bring together everybody to and especially the vulnerable people to make this work. And speaking of that, I'm looking forward to the introduction of Sergio, who will point out what innovative social housing and protection for vulnerable people from energy poverty can look like. Please go ahead.
Thank you to EPC and to all the colleagues for the information we will share today. I'm the managing director of Cariplo Foundation, which is actually a large charity. We have an endowment of 8 billion euros, and we grant every year 150 euros to charitable projects. And within this activity, we are now engaged in tackling many kinds of poverties, in helping migrants, in helping fragile people, also with housing projects. But some 20 years ago, we started also to intervene with impact investments intended to help not the hardest poverty, but to work on low-income housing, so housing for people who are at a risk of becoming poor due to housing issues. And we saw that this was a very relevant issue, especially in metropolitan, in large urban areas. And we started to launch impact real estate funds to couple our resources with those of other institutional investors, and chiefly the Italian Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, which is the National Development Bank, let's say. And so we started with a pioneer fund, and now the investment scheme is very large. It has the size of 3 billion euros across Italy, and this is interesting as a technical financial instrument, but is also interesting with regard to the contents, because we adopted an holistic approach whereby we build real estate, but we build also communities, services, with also R&D investments to improve the energy performance of the buildings, and also the schemes related to people cooperating in order to solve their energy issues, which today has become very, very, very relevant. As you may know, in Italy, the cost of energy is higher compared to the rest of Europe, and fuel poverty is today one of the first point also in the political agenda for transportation, but also for heating, for any need of the people. So here we developed some very sophisticated projects in order to have zero carbon communities. I'm speaking about also large projects which now encompass, for example, 1,000 dwellings and maybe 3,000 people living in the neighborhood, and collaborating within these schemes. And we also made a lot of R&D in terms of building cheap, affordable, not only cheap, real estate with high quality, but also with high energetic performance. So I think there is we launched also a sort of agent to promote this new approach to real estate, which is Fondazione Housing Sociale, and we also promoted a fund manager, because this type of activity is very specific. It's not really real estate. It's something that addresses financial issues, technical issues, but as in the background, the first objective in social issues, among which fuel poverty is today a priority. So I think we can, for those interested, we can offer a great variety of examples and of tools, financial tools, and also of examples on how you can couple financial sustainability and social sustainability and energetic sustainability with a semi-market approach, which is now interesting also for normal investors, because I'm happy that ESG issues or impact issues, which is a step ahead compared to plain ESG, is now very appreciated by institutional investors and also by high net worth people aiming to dedicate part of their wealth to this type of investments. The last thing I would like to mention is that we also worked on letting apartments, but also letting the furniture. So we made a project which is supported by the Climate Kick, which start from an agreement with producers of white goods of standard furniture, whereby for let's say 200 euros per month we provide all the key furniture of an apartment with the possibility to give it back at any point in time, and with the commitment of the producer to completely recycle or renew the furniture in order to be relet. I think that this is the most concrete application of circular economy, which really aligns the interest of the producer to the life cycle of the good and to the true reutilization as a raw material of the components of the products. We have don't want to take too much time to this interesting panel, but we have more than dozens of examples and a lot of things to see if anybody is interested in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergio, for giving us an insight also in concrete examples, how you bring together the financial and social and energy sustainability in a holistic approach in housing. And if I'm giving the floor to Clotilde now, who also will speak about how concrete examples of renovation projects can enlighten us. And she will also speak, of course, about financing the renovation wave and what is in Fit for 55. Please go ahead, Clotilde.
Thank you very much, Melanie. Thank you for inviting me. So I'm Clotilde. I work for FIANSA, which is a European Federation of national organizations working with the homeless. So why a homelessness organization here? Well, because we also work on housing, because it's not everything about homelessness, but it is always part of the solution. So next slide, please. So Fit for 55, I'll take a few minutes just to tell you the position and concern of FIANSA. We are being told Fit for 55 is, and the Green Deal overall are amazing and will be killing two birds with one stone, because it will improve thermal comfort for all with a consequent positive health impact on everyone. It will reduce energy poverty and reduce carbon emission. Next slide, please. And so, of course, we are in favor of a major investment plans that will address the problem of unfit housing. But what we just want to raise and bring to the debate is the fact that this win-win cannot always be assumed. And Stefan Moser said it earlier, because the problem in a major renovation, the renovation wave, is that the money has to come from somewhere, of course. And there are numerous examples of renovation projects that have had a direct negative social impact on people, with rising rents, green gentrification, and we are concerned that imposing energy performance standard without delivering an adequate financing will really put lowest income group between a rock and a hard place. I think you say it. So, for instance, when financing, there had been some tries of financing renovation through expected energy saving, but the reality is that very often those estimations were not accurate, or maybe consumers do not have the expected behavior, and they take benefit of the renovation by maybe heating an extra room or keeping the heating at a certain level, and therefore the rent have increased despite what was planned. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to spend too much time. There are a huge amount, and I'm sure you know all about example of this backlash of major renovation programs. So for instance, in Gothenburg had 42% of its multi-family home were built in the 60s to 70s through the Swedish Million Home Program. So there was a really big need for renovation. And there is a major academic study that has been carried out based on 6 pilot retrofitting projects, and that looked at the fact that the renovation would have been financed through rent increase, and demonstrated how unfair socially this would have been. In Letnica in Poland, a similar project in 2006 and 2014 addressed dilapidated building built in the 1930s, and the direct impact was that half of the population has to move out. Next slide, please. So what does it mean concretely? So we are, of course, in support for the renovation wave, but we want to ask you, when we speak about energy efficiency for whom, and how can we ensure that it will be for everyone, and that, as Franz Timmermans said, it will really leave no one behind. So one of our concerns, for instance, is in the EPBD, the implementation of mandatory energy performance standard, addressing worst performing building is in theory, again, really a victory for us because it should address unfit housing. But the reality is that it doesn't go hand in hand with adequate funding. I will go back to the question of funding later. It's the same for the heating and cooling. Mr. Moser, you spent a few minutes speaking about heat pumps. And heat pumps might be a solution for the climate and to energy independence, but the reality is that they cost about 20,000 euro on average to install, and being unaffordable even for middle-income groups. So how can you reconcile the ambition of renovation wave for heat pumps with the reality of what is happening in Europe and the social context? Social climate fund, yes, of course. That's what we want, but it's just a start. The amount is not sufficient, and most of it, I really hope the idea for it to be financed through ETS2 is off the table now, with increasing energy prices that are already now, with the Ukrainian conflict, completely unaffordable. We can't impose a new increase in energy price. That would actually be the consequence of the implementation of an extension of the ETS. So I think what we ask at FIANSA is for this renovation wave ambition to be socially fair, to be realistic, because at the moment we have the good narrative socially, the Commission understands the risk, but there are no adequate tools to really deliver on a socially fair transition. And I could tell you about social justice, but I know it's not enough, and it might sound a bit idealistic, but so what I want to say, it's also about social acceptability of the Green Deal. I'm French, so you have all heard about the Yellow Vest movement, and it is really a risk, a European Yellow Vest movement, when we see the increase of price. So if the Green Deal and the renovation wave have to happen, they have to be socially fair, or they will not happen. Next slide, please. Yes, so this is not from me, it's from Renovate Europe. And I'm showing it because I'm often shown this graph to tell me, but there is huge amount of financing for renovation in building. So indeed, there is a wide portfolio of possibilities to renovate building. But first of all, for instance, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, it is supposed to address many things, and there is no earmark funding for lowest income groups. So those are my 2 points on this slide. Yes, there is funding, but this funding is often supposed to address many different priorities, and particularly concerning targeting funding to lowest income group. This doesn't happen, this doesn't exist. So what we ask again is some coherence in the funding and prioritization of the funding. Next slide, please. Yes, this is not me either, and actually it stopped in October 2021. So I would be very interested to see a graph more updated until today. But it's just to say, with the Ukrainian crisis, more than ever, you are aware of it. The energy price are increasing, but it will also have a strong impact on cost of living. And we all know what it means in terms of social crisis, and I dare to use the word social crisis. So what does it mean? It means that, yes, there is a need, even greater need for energy independence and a renovation wave, but there is even a greater need to make sure that this transformation, this energy transition will be socially fair. And at the moment, we don't have the tool to ensure this renovation wave will be socially fair. The next slide, please. So I will finish. I have 2 or 3 slides just of recommendation. Sorry. So yes, what we ask is for targeted, ambitious funding, prioritizing first and foremost low-income old home with high potential to deliver warmer homes. It might sound very basic, but the reality is that it is not happening. At least there is no targeted earmarked funding for lowest income group living in cold homes. And as you mentioned, I think, Mr. Moser, the funding has to fund the renovation, but even more broadly, it has to finance a comprehensive package, also financing advice and guidance to people, because the support is not only a financial one. Also, we ask to be realistic. So the mandatory energy performance standard, if they are to come, must finance renovation at a very high risk rate for lowest income group. And I'm speaking of at least 95 to 100% financing. And we need to accept that the energy renovation cannot be filled by private market interests, that this won't happen. We tried, and it sounds really nice to have the rent increase compensate by energy saving, but in reality, it doesn't happen. So next slide, please. Yes, so Repower EU, something positive, of course. Article 5 of the Electricity Directive enabling member states to regulate prices is very good news for us. And yes, I just wanted to reiterate again the risk we see in the extension to the ETS. And then my last slide, please. Yes, so 2 things really mainly for this renovation wave to be fair is the financing. I've spent some time on it. But also beyond financing, there are some tools that the European Commission should be pushing for member states to implement. And some of them are, for instance, a ban on renovation, so eviction after renovation. I know it's not a European competency, but we all know that when there is a political will, there is a way, and there is a way to encourage member states to really make the social aspect of the renovation wave a priority. And it seems to us at the moment that really the big project is the Green Deal, the renovation wave, and the social safeguard is a little bit of an add-on we have put just afterward, but it doesn't work like that. And it must really be at the core of the energy transition, the social aspect. And last slide, I'm very happy to continue the discussion if you're interested. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Clotilde, for your remarks and for already giving us good food for thought for the debate. And I will, of course, also give you the opportunity to react, especially as you have addressed Stefan Moser in some minutes. But first, I would also give the opportunity to speak to Robin about the important role of social housing providers when it comes to implementing Fit for 55 and the renovation wave while offering affordable housing. Please go ahead, Robin.
Thank you. I had a presentation as well. I will be talking today about balancing the green and social goals of social housing providers. My name is Robin van Leijen. I work for Aedes, which is the Dutch organization representing pretty much all social housing providers in the Netherlands, and our members run around 1/3 of the total housing stock in the Netherlands. If I can have my next sheet. We are one of the members of Housing Europe. And actually one of our members is the chair of the Energy and Construction Committee of Housing Europe. He was supposed to give the presentation here today, but he wasn't able to make it, so I will be replacing him, and also on behalf of Housing Europe then. So let me start right in it, and can I have my next slide? And I think it's important to first underline and make it very clear that we fully support the climate plans of the European Commission, and we think building renovation is an important part of that. If you see the recent IPCC report and Ukraine crisis, that's only being reconfirmed. Historically, I think the sector has been doing a lot already. Greenhouse gas emissions from the building sector show a decreasing trend since 2005. And in the social, cooperative, and public sector, the annual renovation rate is around 1.3%. And I think the ambition of the Commission is to get to at least a doubling of the renovation rate of at 2%. And I think that social housing can play a key role here. Actually, I would even like to stress that they can actually deliver. If you look at the chart on the right side of the sheet, this is something from the Dutch Energy Agreement. This was signed already in 2013. And there the Dutch social housing sector committed themselves to having an average label B on stock level by the year of 2020. And label B corresponds to an energy index in the Netherlands of 1.4. And here you can see our developments getting actually to that label B. If I may have my next slide. However, things are not very easy. It's a very complicated thing to do. You could say that Ukraine crisis is a crisis on top of a crisis on top of, well, yet another crisis. The latter two being the climate crisis and the ongoing housing crisis, which is also still there. The housing crisis is particularly a big thing in the Netherlands. The picture you see in my presentation is at one of the housing demonstrations that we had over the last couple of months, and there were quite many actually. And this is both a crisis in affordability with rising housing prices, excessive rents, and a missing middle supply, and availability of housing with, in the Netherlands, an overall shortage of housing on all fronts. And basically, our new government said that we would need 1 million new homes before 2030 to fix that. So that's quite a big challenge. So to deal with all crises at the same time, we need a balanced approach. And I think this was already a very strong point from the presentation of Clotilde, and also a mythbuster from our side. It's just not that simple that building a renovation always leads to an improvement of affordability. In many occasions, it costs more to renovate the building than the savings on the energy bill. So that's an issue. For us in the Netherlands, or for our sector, cost neutrality is the guiding principle. So that means that if we renovate a building, we pass on some of the costs to the tenants, but never more than they actually save on the energy bill. So in the end, they will be neutral. However, that means that the rest of the investment, and I could even say the financial gap, is financed by the social housing provider. And as we are non-profit and we have such a large task ahead of us in new construction, this can really be having a negative impact on our investment capabilities for new construction. Moving to my next sheet. So I think for a social and green transition, we need a very delicate balancing act between affordability, availability, and sustainability. And I do actually believe that the European Commission really tried all their best to get to there. And I think also Stefan, Moser and the team, they deserve a compliment for that. And I see that they take these social issues very serious. However, I do also believe that there are still 3 things that should be taken into consideration. And these are the declining energy returns, changing goalposts, and prioritization. And I will focus on them in my next sheets. To start with declining energy returns, Copenhagen Economics did a study for Housing Europe called Does One Size Fit All? And what they found there is that energy renovations actually have very sharp declining returns to the point where they do not longer pay for themselves anymore. The sheets here on my presentation is an example from the Netherlands, that's on top, and also from Germany at the bottom. And there you can see that to take a worse performing building to like label G to an average label B or better, that's perfectly fine. There's no issue with that. But to go from label B or label A to label A+++, actually you have to spend an enormous amount of investment for very little energy savings in return. And then the savings from a low energy bill will be too small indeed to pay for the investment required. But also from an economic point of view, you could ask yourself, is this the most efficient way of investing? If you spend so much money for so little energy savings, just for the final bit to get from B to A+++, is that the best way of investing? Or could you better spend money in other measures? If I translate that to a more recent context, my question would be, should we renovate buildings to, for example, NZEB standards, as is required in the EED? Or should we renovate a building to a more cost-effective standard and install a heat pump or a solar panel at the second building? If I may have my next slide. This is about changing goalposts. The European Commission wants to phase out worst performing buildings through the introduction of maps. And actually, I think we can fully support that. Renovating worst performing buildings is a good way of reaching climate goals and also reaching social goals. So when it comes to phasing out E, F, and even G buildings for the next years, we can support that. Or to use a quote of a former German chancellor, we schaffen das. That's not a problem. What is an issue though for us is that before this legislation enters into force, the whole new label scale is redefined, and label G will not be label G what it is today. Label G will become the 50% worst performing buildings at the time of the introduction of the new scale, which is, according to the EPBD, 2025 at the latest. In the Netherlands, we plan to phase out E, F, and G buildings between 2022, today, and 2029. So basically say that we get very enthusiastic and we say, well, we phase out all E, F, and G buildings before 2025. It means in 2025, we will have a new label G again, because then our label D will be our new label G, because then that's actually the 15% worst performing buildings. So basically, maybe unintentionally, you're giving a negative incentive to countries to do nothing until 2025. And of course, we won't do this in the Netherlands. We have our own plans and our own ambitions, but it is tricky. Also tricky, only by 2025, we will know which buildings belong to the new label G. And the deadline for public buildings is 2 years later. Then label G has to be phased out. So that's a challenge to phase out 15% of the buildings, public buildings, in 2 years. That's a renovation rate of 7.5%. So I think it's fantastic that Repower EU places such a strong focus on scaling up the workforce, because this really is a bottleneck to have sufficient technical capacity. But even if you do that, 7.5% in a year and 15% in 2 years might be a bit of a challenge. If I can have my final sheet. This is about prioritization. There was twice a negative opinion from the RSB on the EPBD, and I think this has to be taken in consideration. I think nobody's arguing against the goals of the climate goals of the European Commission, and everybody wants to get to the doubling of the renovation rate. But to put the opinion of the RSB into the context, do we really need maps, a 3% renovation rate in the EED, ETS, and ESR, just to get to the doubling of the renovation rate, or are we overreaching a little bit? And my final point is, well, is the EPBD becoming the BD? Is something that my colleague asked me. Well, EPBD stands for Energy Performance of Building Directive. And well, sort of you get the impression that it's just becoming a very general buildings directive with provisions also about climate adaptation, circularity, asbestos removal, indoor climate, accessibility, and parking spaces for bikes. I'm Dutch, so I love parking spaces for bikes, but still it's all very important and all very good to do this. But I do wonder if we need to do everything at the same time at the EU level and through the EPBD. That was my final point. I realize I have been a little bit critical, and I would really like to end on a more positive note than that. As mentioned, we fully support the climate goals of the European Commission, and I actually do believe that we can do the green goals and the social goals at the same time. This is possible, and our members are up for it. But we really do need a bit more balance in the legislative framework to be able to do that. Thank you. I'm looking forward to the debate.
Thank you very much, Robin. And yes, if I then go on with giving you the opportunity to react to what has been said, obviously I would like to give the word first to Stefan again, as he has been addressed by both of our panelists directly. Of course, you can choose whatever you would like to react on, but maybe as there has been a focus, of course, on energy performance of buildings, although we all agree that we have to tackle worst performance buildings, there might be challenges or critique about how the new labels are set. And also what Clotilde has raised, the major challenge that there are rent increases when buildings are renovated. But please feel free to react. Stefan.
Thanks a lot, Melanie and Robin and Clotilde, and of course also Sergio for the interesting remarks. So I think maybe up front, Robin, the as you called it, critical opinion from the Regulatory Scrutiny Board, that has been taken into account. There was ample debate within the Commission what to do with it. You may be aware that initial reflections went further than what we have put on the table. So this is already a scaling down in order to make sure that basically those concerns on subsidiarity and proportionality voiced at the time before the energy crisis, before the escalation in Eastern Europe, I have to say, when it was just the Green Deal and not the aggravated crisis which we have, was the balance. I say this now as a personal statement. I think today it would not have happened in that way, because it's much more urgent now to act, and I think the case for action is much more acute and much stronger than it was at the time. But I mean, judgments are always, and political decisions are taken at certain moments in time, and things are moving very quickly, but they have moved very clearly in a direction where the need for action and reinforced action is much stronger than it was just based on the Green Deal at the time. So just to say that, but also I have to say that the objective has not been to turn the EPBD, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, into a general buildings directive, but to make sure that the synergies are fully realized when touching upon a building, not to forget important aspects, because many renovation measures create multiple or at least several benefits at the same time, and you just need to think about the different aspects which you would like to solve, like accessibility, asbestos, safety issues, fire, and of course also structural safety in seismic areas, adaptation to climate change, greening, and it often costs just a little bit more or not actually anything more to think about the issues. The bad thing would be to do something which actually just forgets half of the important aspects for citizens, and then actually later on we all regret that we didn't think about it before. I mean, it's just a question of adjusting, of thinking about, for instance, also the parking spaces, and that is important for the energy transition as well. We are, so to some extent, sustainable mobility's integration into the buildings is part of the Green Deal, is part of the energy transition, and actually the role of buildings to facilitate the use of sustainable mobility for the citizens living in that building. So I think not to think about parking spaces would be a lost opportunity, and it often does not cost more to do that. Especially, it doesn't cost more to do it up front rather than actually trying to retrofit later on and correct something which has been done in a suboptimal manner before. I think that is the idea. But the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, in many ways, so I do accept that we have provisions on sustainable mobility, but in many ways just makes references to other policy areas like accessibility, safety issues, asbestos, so that which are basically based on other provisions, but to make sure that the whole range of issues is thought about when developing, for instance, the building renovation plan at the national level. So it's more like a kind of checklist. Have you thought about this? Was this on the agenda of your reflections? And that is something which is important for citizens, very important for citizens. those in living in buildings in particular, where there are problems, because if you really go into a deep renovation, you do it once in a lifetime, yeah? So a lifetime of the building, or maybe in the lifetime even of people. It's not something which you can easily do. And what we have also provided in the EPBD is staged deep renovation. So to accept and to enable deep renovations in modular components. So to avoid that everything has to be done at the same time, to limit the negative impact on the inhabitants, but also to ensure feasibility in financial terms, but also technical terms, that people can stay in the building, that the financing is spread over several years, but in any case that you would not create obstacles for further improvements later on. And I think the integrated approach, the integrated thinking is extremely important on everything you do in a building, because it's something which you cannot just undo easily like Legos. Just try, I made an error, the house should be slightly different. 2 years later, you think, well, just put the Legos on the right side and it's bright again. But you would have to destroy important parts which cost a lot of money. And that also links, for instance, to what comes now on the solar rooftops. When we do solar rooftops, which are extremely important now for energy security, but also for the Green Deal, for renewable energy, equally important for both aspects, that this should only be done together with a renovation of the building, at least in a modular, in a thought through modular way, that the roof itself is improved, that the roof is renovated for energy efficiency as much as possible and reasonable, and then you put the solar panels on the roof. Imagine a situation that solar rooftops are put in place, and then after 2 years you discover actually your roof is horrible, it leaks and you lose most of the energy in the building, and then you say down again with the solar panels, and let's just then renovate the roof, and then let's put it up, it costs twice as much. And what you said about the optimization between energy efficiency and renewable energy, I fully agree, that is very important. So that's why we have indeed come to a different and I would say evolved concept of what is actually the vision for buildings. That's the zero emission buildings. So zero emission buildings is a building which is somehow optimized between energy efficiency and renewable energy. So it's not basically that energy efficiency at all costs, whatever it takes to minimize the use of energy for the building or even create a passive house. No, it is basically a concept where you would try to see how far do we reasonably go, what is cost optimal for a building, and then the gap would be covered by renewable energy, so that basically overall you optimize, I would say, for the building, but in particular also for the entire building stock across society, depending, of course, on various factors which shift over time. So relative prices, what does it cost to renovate? What does it cost to produce renewable energy? Are there any bottlenecks? So nothing remains stable over time. That I have to recognize, and not only that, but it's a fact of life that calculations change over time. But as a principle, it's not at all costs energy efficiency and nothing else, but it is basically a reasonable concept. Our main objective is to decarbonize and treat and save energy, of course, to the extent that this is actually beneficial for society. And that, I think, flows together in the concept of zero emission buildings, which is basically the new vision going beyond the nearly zero energy buildings. What Clotilde said about the negative impacts on vulnerable citizens, I think what really has to be accepted is that these things will cost a lot of money, but I think everything will cost a lot of money. So even if we don't do anything for the worst performing buildings, and you didn't say that we shouldn't do anything, of course. I'm just saying that as a general thing, all actions, even non-action, will cost a lot of money, because we simply will have to import massive amounts of fossil fuels. So we have to accept that there's no cheap solution. So it's not a kind of luxury to do anything. The question is, what is the optimal way forward? And I think, and that relates to both of you, we need to prioritize as much as we can where renovations make most sense. where the biggest benefits for society are generated, both in terms of energy savings, but also other benefits, greenhouse gas emission reductions, and societal benefits such as better living conditions, more safety, health, and all that. So that has to be factored in. And it basically needs to be seen as an investment in a better society overall. And from that point of view, I think what both of you said is that there will have to be massive amounts of public investments. And indeed, that will then be used to limit the negative impacts, or actually the impacts which go beyond what vulnerable citizens can shoulder. It does not mean that society, everybody basically, the taxpayers, have to pay for everything, but at least those people from a social policy point of view who cannot shoulder the additional burden which would be imposed on them, that they will be able to remain where they are, that basically they will not be evicted, thrown out of the building from the pure financial effect of rising rents, that they would have, that this would be a major disaster if basically the consequence would be renovictions. Now we have a beautiful building, but please go and sleep under the bridge now because you can't afford any house anymore. This would be a major disaster. And I think we have to accept that society, taxpayers, we all have to pay for some segments of society, vulnerable citizens who otherwise will simply not be able to shoulder all these rising costs. The rising costs are now across the entire society. There are on agricultural products, on food, on clothes, on everything, energy, and some people will get to the bottleneck of not being able to make ends meet anymore, and need to be supported therefore. So I think the enormous inflationary effects which we are facing now will lead to also a kind of need to strengthen social policies. And social policies have to be thought and designed at the same time as housing policies and some other policies. So not to see in isolation, but really see how we move both at the same time, and that social policy adjust always to the changing conditions and take into account increased pressures from inflationary tendencies as we have that now across the entire range of products which many people need. And that I think is necessary. What will be the precise tools, whether there will be a ban, for instance, or rather financial support, I would normally argue what is most effective, and that has to be decided by each member state. Yeah, is it a kind of, I would say, a ban, a command and control measure, or rather social help, that you would look at each one's situation, they can request support, and support will then be provided. And of course, in a very targeted manner, not to waste money and to give money to people who don't need it. That I think is very important, to keep expenses down as much as possible, but still as much as necessary to those who need it. And I think that is the call on member states in the national plans to have this integrated, but also, I would say, flexible approach, that things have to be adjusted possibly relatively frequently because the framework conditions also change. So that will be required, and I think we have to work all hand in hand. We don't know what will happen in the next few years on various fronts, but we have to remain flexible, and I think the national plans which we proposed also, which will be much more operational, much more meaningful than the current long-term renovation strategies for building renovations, they will be the tool and can also be updated very quickly, and then serve as a reference framework for all stakeholders across society.
Thank you. Would anyone like to directly react on that? Otherwise, I would start with the questions that we have also received in the chat, and where we got one question coming back to one specific technology, especially the role of heat pumps that has been mentioned, that could also be controversially discussed, recognizing the role heat pumps should play as a solution to replace fossil fuels and fossil fuels-based heating. What should happen now if we are to accelerate their uptake in EU member states across all levels of society? And are we on the right track when it comes to that? Stefan, would you like to react, or otherwise I'm happy also to.
No, I'm happy to say I'm just was hesitating because I have just spoken, but I think there are several fronts. One is the skills challenge. There needs to be massive upskilling of those who are already active in heating and cooling professionals. In many ways, of course, people often stick to what they know best, and heat pumps is something relatively new. So there are some just practical installers who don't know yet, who are not yet fully confident. I think this is a kind of challenge of upskilling of those who are already in the sector. Then, of course, the numbers are not sufficient. The numbers of people being able to do that in order to shoulder this kind of massive increase in heat pumps. And therefore we need to attract basically professionals or also technically skilled people from other sectors, or young people as something which is really a major opportunity for them to start their career with and really have a perspective of a long-term opportunity. So that is, I think, important to see the skills challenge. Then, of course, we have the physical capacities and the costs. Costs are usually high when volumes are not yet that high, but with scaling up, costs usually go down normally. So in a market, we've seen that with electric cars, with basically everything, with computers, consumer electronics, television, whatever. So it is likely that this will also happen here. I'm not the one who can guarantee that the future will bring exactly that, but that's the usual thing. If you scale up volumes massively, prices, the unit costs will go down. And that's also likely to happen here. So in the transition, in the upgrading, in the upscaling of volumes, there will have to be quite significant support. And there will also be innovation along the way. So and the incentives will be enormous to then invest in innovation to create cheaper and more performing products. There are various fronts where improvements can be made, but I think the more resources from that side will be put in by industry, the better it will be for society in terms of then creating a better and cheaper product. But they need very clear investment signals. And how do they get the investment signals? Basically from public policy, from a regulatory framework which is stable and sets a clear objective, both at the EU level. So basically, what are the broader objectives, but then at the national level through the national plans, and incentive measures which have to be put in place by the member states. We had similar situations on electric cars, for instance. We know about the problems at the beginning, but then it's taken up. And of course, then we have to see also how we develop the most intelligent solutions on higher levels of aggregation. Is it really the most efficient thing to have one heat pump per building, or can there be a kind of street solution, neighborhood solution, including with heat pumps, for instance, or other renewable energy? I'm not saying the only, and that's what I said at the beginning, we should never put all eggs in one basket. There need to be, I would say, there needs to be a certain diversity, but there will be a major and massive increase in the role of heat pumps, but they will not be the only and should not be the only solution in the future. So I think by that is the way which I see things. Member states will have to take quite some significant amounts of money into their hands to promote that, and to help and to work with industry and the social partners, on training also, and to make it happen. Otherwise, it will not happen sufficiently clearly.
Thank you. And then I saw that Sergio had his hand up and wanted to react on that. Sergio?
Thank you. Thank you again, because the presentation of Robin was very inspiring, and all the information is very useful. I wanted to take one of the points Stefan raised, which is off-site deep retrofitting. this is something we are taking seriously into consideration. We are trying to copy from the Dutch experience of Energy Sprong, and we are somehow investing in our R&D center, which is focused on this issue, because there is a lot to do on existing real estate, and so what you can build every year to also to renovate is a very marginal part of the existing stock. So to build to invest on this type of industrialized retrofitting, I think it's very strategic, even if it's very difficult to implement. And I wanted to recall that this green transition has a very deep impact on poverty, as this was very stressed by my colleagues, my speaker colleagues, and this was also implicit in what Robin said about the cost of the green transition and the cost effectiveness in terms of savings. So this is has to be taken seriously into account by policymakers, because there is a sort of anger which is increasing into people. Now in Italy, if you go to refuel your car, the cost per liter is 2.5 euros, which to me it's significant. To somebody else maybe implied not to be able to go to work or to do their work. So this is a sort of emergency, and I think there is a lot to evaluate around these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And then Clotilde raised her hand also.
Thank you. Thank you, Sergio, for underlying this aspect. I just wanted to react on the heat pump debate, because I see everywhere a major push for heat pump technology, and I'm a bit concerned because, as I explained earlier, it is a very expensive technology. Stefan, you spoke of the scaling up that might trigger a decrease in cost, but heat pump costs have actually increased over the past 10 years. And looking at the situation, it looks like nothing is going to decrease. So I think we are concerned at Fianza to see something kind of being designed with, of course, a needed reduction of fossil fuel being implemented through higher taxes or a ban, and on the other side, a push toward the technologies that is not affordable for most people. So I don't have a solution. I know there are, as you said, there are alternative renewable, but what my point is, I think we need to be realistic. I was at a meeting with a major study on the cost of the transition 2 days ago, and we were told that the estimate on the cost of the energy transition was based, for instance, on a heat pump replacements costing on average 8,000 euros, based on studies that the cost will decrease. This is not serious. I think if we want to be serious about the social transition, we have to be serious and realistic about the cost. And we are not naive. We know it will be expensive. We know people we have to pay. But what we ask is also not some green or social washing, but just the reality and be clear. And I had another point, but it will come back. Sorry. Thank you.
Then Robin also wanted to come in.
Yeah, first, to just fully support what Clotilde just said. For us, 8,000 is for a hybrid heat pump, and an electronic heat pump would be about 15 to 20,000 per building. Coming down to bottlenecks for upscaling heat pumps, I think I could name 3, which should be taken into consideration. First is the financial issue, and of course, I think Clotilde stressed that it just costs a lot of money, and there needs to be funding for that. Second one is in resources, and I think Stefan, you mentioned it already yourself, that there really needs to be an upscaling of the workforce, because we do not have sufficient hands to install those heat pumps, but we also don't have sufficient hands to make the heat pumps production-wise. And the third is also, and it also relates to solar panels, the capacity of the grid. We receive serious signals in the Netherlands that it's becoming more challenging to electrify houses because the grid can only handle so much. So this requires really upfront investments as well to increase that. On the side of usually if there is more mass and more demand for a product, the prices will go down. Economically, yes, that would make perfect sense. In the Netherlands, we don't really see that. So we, as you know, we signed up for phasing out natural gas about 4 years ago, both to heat pumps and to district heating. And we try to bundle volumes. And so far we've seen prices rising instead of decreasing of heat pumps. So economically it makes sense, but in reality, we don't always see it. That's an issue.
I think if I might just react very quickly, I think currently, unfortunately, everything is rising in terms of costs. The question is, what is rising relatively more and what is the relative increase? I think we are in a dramatic inflationary situation now with all materials becoming more expensive. And that I think is making it certainly more difficult. But actually that applies for all technologies. But I think in principle, the logic of scaling up leads to relative decreases of prices. Relative, it may still in absolute terms increase depending on overall inflation. Is a logic which is very hard to I would say to put into question, and we would have to understand why it would not be happening here, because normally the development costs and simply all the conceptual costs will be spread over much larger numbers. So I think I don't see why it would, in relative terms at least, not happen here. But of course the challenge is big, and I think we need to also diversify. And in the Netherlands, you've done I would say exemplary work by looking also at the respective strengths and possible solutions in certain neighborhoods when phasing out from gas, and I think we need to look at all options on the table. The objective is not to, I would say, to install heat pumps. The objective is to decarbonize, and the question, what are the different options which are on the table, and we should diversify as much as possible. I think that is important. What I said about the grid, indeed, we have to think about the grid very much. That's why also in the EPBD proposal, we have given a certain priority to on-site renewable energy solutions. I think, for instance, on the roof, but also locally organized, so that basically the burden on the grid would not be as high. But of course, there will also have to be some solutions through the grid, and to that extent, of course, grid development always needs to be taken into account, and adequacy assessments need to be made, and that also requires a long-term strategic approach and investments also, of course.
Thank you. As we are talking about heat pumps and heating, there is another question from the chat reminding us that, yes, of course, it's all about warmer homes and a priority for this period and next winter. But what about cooling, given that we are also facing a lot of heat waves and people are also not able to adequately cool their homes? This question has been addressed to Clotilde because she might have mentioned heat pumps first, but any thoughts on this particular question?
Yes, no, that's a very fair point, and it came more from a lack of precision in my wording than a deliberate willingness to avoid. But of course, it's about adequate temperature. Yes.
Of course. And there also was a question for Sergio, but he has already reacted in a written form. But still, if you would like to also come back on the question in the chat, that was how you would prioritize your investments and how to avoid green gentrification. Would you like to add something?
Oh,
Sergio?
Yes, thank you. First of all, we prioritize our investments, trying to reach the places where there is more need and more pressure on prices. So basically, the Milan urban area is accounts for some 70% of our impact investment activity. Gentrification is the enemy because we work also on urban regeneration, we work on places, peripheral areas where nobody wants to go, then we develop many thousand apartments and a nice neighborhood, sort of paradise, if you let me say it, where I would like to live, but I can't. But there is a risk of gentrification because then the neighborhood increase the price, and there is a sort of risk of expulsion of people who were liked to live in a semi-decent place, but quite affordable. So what we do is to use long-term capital. Our impact real estate funds have an horizon of 30 years, are low return for investors, and so there is a stable relationship with the tenant, and there is no risk on the renewal of the rental contract. And we work to increase the stock of affordable rented housing. And I must say that again, the Dutch experience is really an example for Europe, in my opinion, because their stock is well preserved, well maintained, and it is a strategic infrastructure for urban areas.
Thank you. And as we are coming closer to the end of this event, I would like to give you the opportunity to leave us with a message. One thing all of you would like to leave us with, bearing in mind that we are in exceptional times that call for exceptional measures. Also, ideas from thinking outside of the box are very welcome. And coming back to our initial question of delivering a just transition and how to protect vulnerable people, I would like to give us a message that focuses on the fact what could happen now to support vulnerable people. I don't know if anyone wants to start first. Yes, Robin, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I have a bit of a cough. Well, for me, the key takeaway is that building renovation does not equal lower cost for tenants. I think that's the main conclusion. And if you want to have a social transition, that should be in your policy thinking. That can be done in different ways. It can be done by balanced regulation. It can be done, as Stefan Moser stressed, through massive public support, which we fully, obviously support. But also, if you go for that option of massive public support, do take a look at state aid rules, because 45% is still the maximum state aid intensity for building renovation. And if you're taking wider societal benefits into consideration, we only need that 45% already to cover the financial gap between energy savings and the investment cost. So again, I'd like to stress the positive. I do think it's possible. We can do social, we can do green at the same time, but we really need to make the right considerations. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I can, I would like to recall what a French politician said in 1954, Jean Monnet. He said that Europe will be built based on crisis, and will be built based on the solutions to those crises. I think this is unfortunately illuminating, and I think that now that we are in a crisis, we have to rethink policies, and maybe also to rethink large investment and subsidy schemes, because the time need to a deep rethinking. And I think that housing policies seen in the view of green transition, seen on the view of social justice, need to take some space within the political European agenda, and to be addressed straight, and not always from the sides, let's say. In my opinion, there is a huge need of these. It cannot be left only to regional agendas, which are so diverse that we risk to lose the common point there.
Thank you. Who wants to go next? Yes, Clotilde.
If I may, thank you. I think I'm not exaggerating, and that we all know we are at the brink of a major social crisis. If we are to push for this green transition, there must be a major investment, major public investment for this renovation wave, because at the moment we have the political investment, the political drive, but it is not accompanied by the appropriate funding to protect the most vulnerable. And there are some ideas. I think it's not a lost cause. Positive Money is carrying out this project for targeted longer-term refinancing operation. It's a program from the European Central Bank with a negative interest rate lending. That's one of the alternatives we propose to the financing of the Social Climate Fund. There is also the idea of a financial transaction tax. There are many ideas actually in terms of financing. So I also want, like Robin, to be positive. I've been very negative, but I think what we want is to see this renovation wave to go beyond just a declaratory interest for lowest income groups, but also see the financial equipment going with this major renovation plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that statement, also because I fully agree with it. I think on finance we need to be innovative, bring in as much as possible, but it will not be sufficient overall private financing. So public money has to come in. We need to see it as a kind of collective responsibility, not a kind of just a burden, but as an opportunity to create a better society. But I think I also would like to say that it is important to not to jump all in on one single solution, but to remain creative and think also how to keep costs down, to see what can be reasonable neighborhood solutions at higher levels of aggregation, to really make sure that we include inhabitants, citizens in a district, how they would like to live, what concerns they have. And that are then the different aspects to be thought about when renovating, and trying also to keep costs down as much as possible. We talked about finance, but also keeping costs down. Low-cost solutions, of course, standardized solutions which don't have to look the same. Thinking about, as a very important point, about cooling also with nature-based solutions, greening buildings, natural ventilation of buildings. Often this would then not require the further use of energy, but simply a kind of intelligent design or retrofitting of an existing building, which leads to tremendous positive effects on the cooling of buildings. Notably, with heating, it usually doesn't help, but of course insulation helps for both. But there are very important ventilation effects from natural solutions. And I think that's something where a lot of innovation, but also creative thinking needs to take place with the project advisors, architects, engineers. And I think we have an interest also for that reason, to have higher levels of aggregation, to think about neighborhoods, districts, communities, where you can then professionalize with advisors. Yeah, so share the costs across a larger number of people, and then have also more attractive financing conditions, instead of everyone doing their own thing and having a lot of difficulties on the way. And I think also for the urban planning, it makes a lot of sense. And I think in the Netherlands, this is happening in a, I would say, exemplary manner also, in your own energy transition, which has been triggered actually by a related but a different challenge, getting out of gas from Groningen, basically from the Groningen gas field, which was somehow aligns fully with the Green Deal, but it's motivated by simply having no earthquakes there anymore, and you need to transform the whole country. But you basically try to engage with citizens across the country, try to see what are regional solutions and local solutions. I think that working method should be applied and can be used definitely as a very good practice for other member states as well.
Well, then only to conclude, thank you very much for your very interesting contributions to our debate that comes at which is a timely debate in these difficult times, I think. Thank you very much again, Fondazione Cariplo, for supporting this event. And I can only say that EPC will, of course, closely follow the further developments in this field. Please stay tuned for our future events. And thank you very much again. Have a nice day.
Thanks a lot, Melanie, and all of you.